Hello and welcome back to Everything Boats with Captain Frank Lanier, where we discuss boats and boating, from maintenance and repairs to seamanship and safety, as well as everything in between. This podcast is a companion to my YouTube channel of the same name, so if you like and find it useful, be sure to subscribe and please check out my YouTube channel as well, where you'll find hundreds of informative videos on pretty much every boating topic imaginable. So today's podcast is based on a segment of my YouTube channel called Ask Captain Frank. And this is where I take questions from my YouTube channel viewers, customers of my marine survey business, or just people randomly calling me up trying to get me to answer shit for free. So today's question is from a potential client. He sent me a advertisement for a boat that he's thinking about buying. So he highlighted the section of the broker's advertisement where it says the bottom's been freshly peeled, barrier coated, and it's ready for its next adventure. And he asked me about that, and he said, well, this is a good thing, right? It's freshly peeled and barrier coated and ready for his next adventure. And, my answer to him is, well, it all depends. When I see something like this, I'm a card carrying pessimist, right? The benefit of being a pessimist is you only get pleasant surprises. And when I look at something like that, the red flags go off, okay? Because one, peeling the bottom and doing a barrier coat job is not something that a boat owner typically does just on a whim, right? He does it for a reason. And probably in this case, the reason is that he had a blister issue and he's trying to resolve it. I mean, again, this would all be something that would come out during the survey, when we take a look at the boat and stuff. But this is kind of the mindset you have to have. When you see something like that and it seems like it's a good thing, your frame of mind as a buyer should be, okay, I'm glad they did it, but why did they do it? And again, this is something that would come out when we do the survey. We'd take a look at it and we'd see why they peeled it and why they barrier coated it and stuff. But, you always got to be on the lookout. Just because something sounds good, and it may be good, but you got to verify it. And again, the most likely scenario is that the owner of this boat had a issue with blisters, and he's tried to resolve it. And it must be a pretty severe case of it. When you peel the bottom and you barrier coat it, the barrier coat not so much, but when you peel the bottom, that is an expensive proposition. So I guess let's talk a little bit more about the blisters in general, right? So I'm going to give you a Cliff Notes version of what a blister is. This is a very basic scenario, and there's lots of variables and there's lots of other things that can come into this when you're talking about blisters. But just to give us something to talk about, where we're all on the same page, we're going to give you a very basic scenario of what a blister is. So let's say the boat he's looking at is a 80s trawler or something like that, right? That's typically where you find this stuff, or it could be a sailboat too, right? So when they make the hull for these boats, they typically, you've got a mold and you spray the gel coat into the mold, and then you spray what's called a skin out mat. And the skin out mat is nothing but chopped fiberglass strands, chopped fiberglass cloth, fiberglass strands, chopped up, and it's impregnated with resin. So they spray this skin out mat into the mold after the gel coat. And then they start putting the laminate in there, the cloth. So the reason that they do the skin out mat, the only purpose of the skin out mat is to prevent the weave of the cloth from showing through the gel coat. That's why it's chopped. It's random orientation and stuff, so that the weave doesn't show through the gel coat. So they do the gel coat, skin out mat, and then they put the laminate in. Okay. Well, sometimes depending on the quality of the build or how the worker was that day or whatever, you may have imperfections in the skin out mat. Like you have voids and stuff in there, or it could be issues with the epoxy they use. There's a whole litany of things that could go on. But again, this is just a basic example and of what a blister is, right? So once you put the boat in the water, gel coat is an extremely porous material. Water will readily pass through the gel coat. And when it goes through the gel coat, water is a very small molecule, so it goes through the gel coat. And if there are any voids or pockets or bad epoxy or whatever in the skin out mat, then the water will get in there and start to dissolve the resin and stuff. As it does that, its composition changes. So now it's a, for lack of a better term, a bigger molecule, right? Because it absorbs this stuff. Now it can't get back out the gel coat because it's a bigger molecule, and it starts to build up pressure. And of course, if you've got pressure, then the pressure is going to push out towards the gel coat because it is weaker than the laminate is. So typically, it's going to start pushing out through the gel coat, and this is what the beginnings of a blister is. Now, of course, as it goes and develops, it can certainly go into the laminate as well. But this is, again, a very generic, very basic explanation of what blistering is. Primarily blistering is, right? So as a marine surveyor, I'll see, let's say you've got, two scenarios when it comes to blisters, right? First of all, before we get into that, blisters themselves rarely are blisters, structurally significant. Okay. I have some, I have seen some of them that are the size of a pie plate or a softball, right? So those are extreme cases. Normally, you're going to have two types of scenarios when you're dealing with blisters. One that'll be blisters that are, maybe, 2, 3, 4 inches in diameter, a little bit larger, but they're sporadically placed about the hull. The other type you're going to have is called boat-pox, is for like, this is a term that a lot of surveyors are used, boat-pox. That's where you've just got the whole bottom of the boat is just covered in blisters, small blisters, ranging in size, from very tiny up to a little bit more larger, right? A little bigger. So those are the two basic scenarios of blisters about what you'll have to deal with when you buy a boat, or if you haul a boat out and for a survey, and this is what you find. Now for the first scenario where you just have larger blisters, but there are not so many of them, I typically recommend, you spot treat these blisters, based on their size. If they're an inch or two, really, it's not going to affect anything on the boat. It's not structurally significant. It's not going to affect the operation of the boat. So my recommendation is typically, you inspect the hull at every normal, every regularly scheduled haul out, which is typically about every year, 2 years, right? Most boats, you'll haul them out at least every couple of years to paint the bottom and stuff and do your routine maintenance. So if I see a boat that has, random blisters around, but they're a couple, 3 inches or less in inches in diameter, I'll say, spot treat the ones that are above, maybe 3 to 4 inches, and monitor the hull. And the next time you haul out, inspect the hull, see if they've gotten any worse. If any of the larger blisters have increased in size, then you spot treat them. And then you just kind of live with it, right? Again, they're not structurally significant. They're not going to affect the operation of the boat. The only thing they will do is, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is that if you have blisters, they can certainly affect the resale value of the boat. And the primary reason they would affect the resale value of the boat is going to be because, if you have a buyer and he's, a lot of buyers, when they look at boats and they see blisters, they think terminal cancer. And that's not the case, but a lot of them think that. So that could affect, you may have a buyer or 2 or 3 that sees the blisters and then they just walk, they're petrified of the blisters. I can tell you, for most of the boats from the 70s, 80s, up into the 90s, you would be hard pressed to find a boat that didn't have some blisters on. They're not all going to have blisters, but it's certainly not something that's uncommon or unusual. So let's get back to the blisters. The larger blisters, you're spot treating them. How do you do it? Well, you follow the manufacturer's instructions for the, with the resin and stuff that you use. But, what you would typically do is, you're going to grind out the blisters to good laminate, get down to where the laminate is good and solid. And then you fill them with thickened epoxy. And then you smooth it out, and then you treat it just like you would the rest of the fiberglass hull. The next scenario you're going to have is boat-pox. This is where you've just got the whole bottom of the boat is covered in blisters. They could be very tiny, match head size, or a little bigger or whatever, or they could be larger. But the whole surface area, for the most part, of the, below the waterline of the hull is covered in these blisters. So for something like this, you got basically 2 choices. You're going to have the one, you just live with it, right? Again, if they're small but are all over the boat, this is something that, probably has the layup of the boat has an issue with the epoxy, the layup, the schedule that they used, or something is typically, causes this, right?
So there's only two things you can do. You can live with it, or you can do what the client has shown me, what's advertised, what the broker said for this boat that he's looking at, is you peel the bottom. And basically what that does is, they remove the bottom of the hull below the waterline. They take the gel coat off. They being the yard or whoever you hire to do it. They take the gel coat off and they take the skin out mat and they get down to the laminate, fiberglass laminate, and then they build it back up. Is what they're supposed to do. They build it back up to the original thickness, and then they put the barrier coat on it, and then you go from there. This is a very expensive job. It's you're never going to hear blisters bottom job and peeling or planing the bottom and cheap in the same sentence. It's always going to be pretty darn expensive, and in a lot of cases for older boats, it's probably you're probably going to be approaching the point where is it even economically feasible to do this? Because the value of the boat versus how much it's going to cost to do this, you may decide that it's just not worth it, and you're going to live with it, right? And that's probably what the seller is going to do too. If you find a boat and you have it hauled out for survey, and this is what you go. It's a very expensive proposition. It's not cheap. And a lot of times, even the people that do this, the yards or the subcontractors or whatever, they'll do it and they'll charge you, quite a bit for it. And a lot of times they don't even guarantee the blistering won't reappear. So, I mean, some of them do, but a lot of them don't. So that's another thing. If you're going to spend all this money, to peel the bottom to address these boat-pox, then, you're going to have to think about, where you have it done and what kind of warranty and stuff they offer. So I guess in closing, as far as the blister things, the key takeaways here are, if, they're not typically structurally significant, if you are in a situation where you just have maybe, 10, 15, or 20 of them, and you can spot treat them as needed and just go about your business, that's probably going to be the most economical way that you're going to address it. If you've got the boat-pox where the whole bottom is affected, well, again, typically it's not going to be structurally significant. It doesn't look good and we don't like it, but you have to look at the cost versus the value of the boat ratio, and is it really worth? I mean, there's a lot of other places I'm sure you could probably spend money on other than doing a bottom job, all the other equipment stuff you want on a boat and everything like that.
I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. And if so, and you want to buy Captain Frank a cup of coffee, please click on the support link in the text description below. All monies received, not spent on coffee, will go towards making even more awesome podcasts for my channel. And as always, thank you for your support.